What's the most WTF thing you've ever heard someone casually admit like it was totally normal? Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss any videos. Enjoy watching. Elderly man casually points out the window of the bus. See that building over there? That was the first bank I robbed. Turns out he'd just spent 20 years in prison for robbing a half dozen banks. I asked him what he spent his money on, and he'd buy expensive vintage cars and take them to the auto shop where my dad used to work. I'm pretty sure his tips are what paid for my new bike one Christmas. Story 2. I was at an airport terminal some years ago waiting for a plane to fly east from San Diego. An old man struck up a friendly conversation with me and started telling me about he was leaving the city for the last time, how every day for the last 15 years he's walked a trail behind his house to his dog's grave to visit, and now that morning was the last time. I was nearly in tears at how sweet it was, but then he kept talking. I'm also gonna miss the girls down in TJ, Tijuana. They'll treat you like a king, no matter if you're old and ugly like me. They'll do things your wife would never dream of for $20, and kept rambling on about Mexican prostitutes in shocking detail with an almost wistful look in his eye. Fortunately, we didn't sit next to each other on the plane. Just to be clear, I'm no knocking workers or their patrons. It was just jarring for a total stranger to go from sweet story about his dead dog to graphic specifics about individual acts he had paid for. Story 3, I took a guy I was dating to see his mom. Naive me expected like coffee and cookies or something in a house and met with mom and her boyfriend, one-room apartment. She said we needed to cut the visit short because she needed to go sleep with someone for drug money, and her kids acted like that was totally normal and started saying goodbyes. Not judging, it was painful and made me realize how good I've had it. Story 4, an acquaintance got drunk and told me a story from his past. He was in the process of getting a divorce, but he didn't want to pay child support for his 3 kids, so he had his friends start spiking her drinks so she would fail a future custody drug test and also lose her job as a teacher. She ended up getting addicted, went into a tailspin, and disappeared for about 20 years until she finally got clean and turned her life around. This guy was still proud of causing his kids to grow up without their mother in their lives. Story 5. During onboarding training for my new job, we played that game 2 Truths and 1 Lie. One of my new colleagues said that when she was younger, she had drowned a chicken in a bucket of water, and it wasn't a lie. Everyone else was horrified and kept bringing it up for the rest of the training. Story 6. He and his brother fathered multiple children in Vietnam with multiple women during the war and pretty much refused/avoided contact. They were just chatting with the family casually during a get-together, and talk eventually turned to the war. One of the other uncles said something like, "You have a couple kids over there, right?" And he nodded and his brother nodded, and they spent a couple minutes just casually talking about the Vietnamese women they'd impregnated while serving over there. They acted like it was okay since it was just workers and girlfriends and they didn't force anybody, but the casualness and even almost comedic way they talked about it just sort of blew my mind. Edited to add, they were both married at the time this happened, and one of them's wife was actually sitting right there with us while he was casually discussing this. She knew about it, and it was old hat to her. She'd heard about this multiple times before and wasn't even fazed by it. Story 7. I was talking to a coworker during lunch one day, just making small talk, when he said to me, "Yeah, my dad used to train squirrels to chase people off our property." He explained that his dad would feed the squirrels in their yard and got them comfortable enough to follow commands. They started chasing off stray cats and even people who wandered too close to the house. He said it so casually, like it was totally normal. The craziest part was animal control eventually got involved because the squirrels were getting too aggressive and they had to relocate some of them. I still don't know if that's really the truth or if there's a gang of attacked squirrels out there. Story 8. A coworker I once had that didn't last very long for many, many reasons, basically casually told us how when he was 13, him and his buddies shared a blow-up doll. Like, one would use it and then the next guy would be like, "Hey, can I hang on to that for a few days?" And so on and so on. He told us this like it was a hilarious story. I thought maybe he would regret admitting something like that to a group of people who essentially all called him strange for it. But A few weeks later, he must have forgotten he told us the story because he casually just told us again. He must tell the story a lot. This guy's head was in a different universe. Story 9. Friend from high school telling me about his weekend. He went to the Nigbor girl's house. She was home alone, so he went in and hung out. He tells me, I hit on her and she said no. Then continued with, I was going to leave, but instead I just started raping her. He said it so calmly I thought I had misunderstood him. I asked, what? He repeated it. I was shocked. I don't know how he expected me to respond. I left. Went to her house and found her crying with her mom. They'd called the cops. I stuck around and told the police what he'd said. I heard he killed someone a few years ago. Not guilty because of insanity. Story 10, a coworker told me he doesn't use toilet paper, just lets it dry and flakes it off later. I feel sick even sharing this, but he really does always have a stench about him. He said it like it was the most normal thing in the world too, and he is not joking, not the kind of guy to joke at all. Matter of fact, he is quite aggressive and we nearly got into it, but that is for another day. And yes, he does eat his boogers too. Story 11, the maintenance guy at work said his kids were afraid of cockroaches, so he took some cockroaches, ground them up, and mixed the bits into their cereal without telling them. I have questions, but my initial horror overrode my ability to speak at the time. Now it would be very strange to bring it up again. Story 12. In college, at a small party, a girl I was interested in at the time told me that she loved to have relations with the family pet, a Doberman. To this day, it's better on my mental health that she just said that as a very off-the-wall way to get me to stop talking to her. It worked. As a truck driver, I've had multiple coworkers across multiple companies admit some bonkers. Like one guy said, he wouldn't shower until he smelled like rancid beef for 3 days in a row. Another waxing almost poetically and in graphic detail about how much he loved the ladies of the night in West Memphis. Finally, my favorite, and one I hope was just an incredibly tasteless joke, was a guy talking about how he liked to copulate with roadkill. Reading that back, I'm glad I don't work in OTR trucking anymore. Story 13. One summer in high school, I worked in a kitchen that ran a vocational program to help ex-cons learn a trade. I was one of 2 high school kids hired to help out, me and this girl. The people running the program didn't want her around the ex-cons, so she worked the front cash box while I was in the back, making food with the guys. I got along with most of them, and we usually had a good time. There was one guy who mostly kept to himself and made the soup of the day. Everyone knew he had anger issues. He'd blow up over the tiniest things, like disagreeing with the chef about how to prep the soup. One day he started slamming ladles and pots around because he was pissed at the chef for some reason or another, so chef sent him up front to work the register. The girl came back to work with us, then about 20 minutes later, the vocational staff freaked out about that. I guess he couldn't be around cash, and told him to go back to the kitchen. When he came back, he was talking about the voc staff being a piece of, and casually mentioned that he'd killed someone before and wouldn't hesitate to do it again. I was just standing there like, what the hell? Trying not to panic while he looked at me with crazy eyes. I legit thought he might snap and go postal. He never did anything, but after that, I made it a point to steer way clear of him. Story 14. I used to work in a restaurant, and my manager said that one of the line cooks bragged about killing someone when he was really drunk. A little earlier, that line cook had choked another line cook when they got in an argument about who was better at their job. Somehow that restaurant never got sued. Story 15. In my teens, my older brother had a bunch of friends over and they were all in their 20s from what I remember. One dude was asking to see our 2 ball pythons. While he was holding mine, he was trying to convince me to sell her to him, and him and his GF/wife started talking about the turtle they had until their young kid threw it into the wall and killed it. Everyone started bursting out laughing except me. Took my snake back and told him no, even when he started offering more than my wild type was worth. And this is why I don't talk to people IRL about pets. Everyone feels the need to tell you about their hamster, lizard, fish, bird, etc. that died not only horrifically, but it's almost always completely preventable or from neglect, often experiences that they never learned from, which at best just made them stop getting more after their dog killed their 4th bird. Story 16. I had a weird coworker who I would invite over sometimes because I felt sorry for him. He and his wife were separating, and he was telling me all about how his wife was staying with and sleeping with some older guy that they had met at a bar. He then goes on to say that he'll stay up drinking most nights, and one night he punched his wife when he was drunk. All of a sudden, the whole scenario made sense. He was always quiet and standoffish at work because he was hungover. His wife was leaving him because he hit her. Story 17. I used to work at a call center. We worked in cubicles. My coworkers were chatting with one another, and one of them mentions how their dog was getting big and wasn't as cute anymore and that they didn't have time to play with them. They had gotten the dog for their granddaughter originally. So one day they take the dog out in their car and abandon it. I was facing the wall of the cubicle, not facing them, and was in tears. After that coworker went to lunch, the other one asked if I was okay. Eventually, I heard that the dog actually found its way back home, and they decided to just keep it again. The whole thing was so messed up to me, I lost respect for that person. Story 18. Oh God, this disastrous first date I went on, just the order the conversation devolved was unparalleled. 1, he randomly drops that he has a kid. Okay, not a big deal. 2. Kid is 13 years old. This guy is 28 years old. So some crazy math to start. 3, the last time he saw his kid was when the kid was 9 years old. 4, he has no plans to see his kid until the son is 18 years old. 5, he will just tell his son that his baby mama is insane and is trying to trap him into marriage. He truly believed this. 6, his baby mama was, at the time of the date, engaged and had been dating said man since right before she gave birth. 7, baby dads, the guy I'm on a date with. Mom does free nannying over most weekends. Unsupervised. No baby mama. Baby dad doesn't want to go see his kid then. I was in literal awe. He was talking like it was the most normal conversation. Right before the end of the date, he actually was worried I was going to judge him because he was anti-vax. Sir, we were long past that worry. Story 19. Yeah, my dad used to throw our cat against the wall when he was making us mad. It was really funny. I was furious when I heard this from a classmate, and to top it off, his dad was my science teacher. I ripped that classmate a new one and transferred out of his dad's class the first chance I got. Those animal-abusing bastards. Story 20, I have a really good friend that has terrible relationship anxieties and fear of being alone. Basically, she admitted to me several times over the course of different relationships that she was ready to move on from the relationship, but XYZ holiday or birthday was coming up, so she'd wait for that to come and go. And once she let a man fully finish helping her remodel her kitchen before breaking up. Really made me look at her differently, and I've kept my distance since that admission. Really gross. Story 21. My friend's new GF has a daughter who is 11. I asked what she's into, sports or Pokemon or Barbie. She casually responded saying she's into computers and drawing, and she's never eaten solids, aka solid foods, aka has never chewed a food. She eats baby food and drinks one particular brand of milk and has since she was 1 year old and mom stopped breastfeeding. Of course, then I spent the rest of the dinner asking if she looks ridiculously emaciated. Is her blood work all wonky? What happens if she travels? Do you just order pallets of baby food from Costco? Story 22. I worked as an engineer at a factory for 5 years. One of the senior design guys and I were pretty close. This guy was really technical, college educated, and overall a great guy. He was probably the person I was closest with at work, and one day we went to lunch together and carpooled. I forget what the topic of the conversation was, but he says, I can't believe people really think we went to the moon. The statement itself wasn't that WTF, but the fact it came from him really threw me off. Story 23. I had a friend of like 5 years come out and tell me while we were playing the first RDR that he doesn't mind cats, but that he hates kittens and tortures them. Throwing them against walls, tying their tails together and dangling them over laundry lines to watch them fight. I paused the game to say, you should keep that to yourself. He goes into shock mode and dials back with, oh, that was a long time ago. And I don't hate grown cats. Like that somehow justified it. We sat quietly for a while until he got the vibe and left, and we haven't spoken in like 15 years since. Story 24. Coworker had a phone call and I told him I'd cover while he took it. He came back in and told me that it was his doctor informing him that he was positive for chlamydia, which he apparently got from a tick. I doubt you can get chlamydia from a tick. I also didn't ask what the phone call was about. He just shared this info unprompted. Story 25. My friend, a doctor, once told me about his childhood very well. Where do I begin? My father was a relentlessly self-improving boulangerie owner from Belgium with low-grade narcolepsy and a penchant for buggery. My mother was a 15-year-old French prostitute named Chloe with webbed feet. My father would womanize. He would drink. He would make outrageous claims like he invented the question mark. Sometimes he would accuse chestnuts of being lazy. The sort of general malaise that only the genius possess, and the insane lament. My childhood was typical. Summers in Rangoon, luge lessons. In the spring, we'd make meat helmets. When I was insolent, I was placed in a burlap bag and beaten with reeds. Pretty standard, really. At the age of 12, I received my first scribe. At the age of 14, a Zoroastrian named Vilma ritualistically shaved my testicles. There really is nothing like a shorn scrotum. It's breathtaking. I suggest you try it. Story 26. I was in a fancy coffee shop in Mayfair last year where a lot of the clientele are custom-suited gentlemen. Behind me, there were a pair, a younger guy and an older one who I guessed could be his mentor for work or career, etc. Anyway, the older guy comes in, very posh and polite. Sorry you had to wait for me, the usual chit-chat. When asked how he's doing, he said, "Oh, you know, busy weekend. My girlfriend fell off a horse and broke her back, so had to get to the hospital, etc. Might be paralyzed for life. Doctors aren't sure yet. Anyway, let's crack on about your investment portfolio draft." It was the nonchalant attitude and the way he brushed off a life-changing event that stayed with me. Also, I can't imagine my husband would go to work or do other non-urgent business the next day if something like that were to happen to me. Story 27. Ruby Frankie posting a video on YouTube where she refuses to bring her daughter food, who was 6 at the time. Ruby goes on to say her daughter is the one responsible for making her lunch. Then Ruby says she will have to go hungry because she didn't make her lunch, and says, hopefully, nobody gives her food or steps in and gives her a lunch. Story 28. A guy I cooked with in a bar got into growing/selling pot with 2 other guys. One day, he said, the lead guy took them way out in the sticks and opened a box, which contained 4 hand grenades. He had them choose one at random, showed them how it worked, then threw it and it exploded. Then they all took one with the understanding that if one of them ratted, the other 2 hand grenades would find them. Months later, he said there was trouble because one guy's bill found out what was happening and wanted money to stay quiet, and they didn't know how to handle it. A week later, he came in and said they stormed into the Bill's house, dragged him to the living room, and they held his hand down on the mantle. And I chopped off 3 of his fingers with a hatchet. I didn't know what to say, so I asked which finger dolls. He said little, ring, and middle. I said, you gave him permanent finger guns? He thought that was funny and said he was going to tell his partners. Then he said, I chucked them in the woods. Nobody will find them. Story 29. I had a friend in college who had a really unfortunate upbringing and family life. Domestic violence, drug use, past abuse, all of that. It was unfortunately common for her to say things casually, loudly about her family that she genuinely didn't realize wasn't normal. We actually got in a fight about it once because I tried to quiet her down. I saw it as trying to protect her, as people looked down at her or would make others uncomfortable unknowingly. She thought I was controlling. Anyways, I think that incident was sparked because she was loudly talking about her sister getting caught stealing for Story 30. A teacher I had in high school once told us, 1, he used to be a sociopath, and the idea of sociopaths is wrong because everyone will have a phase of it at some point in life. 2, that physically ugly people look that way because their inner selves show through. Like, a physically ugly person is a bad person, and it's a good idea to avoid ugly people because of that. Story 31. A customer at work said he just got out of jail and that's why he needed to set up an account. Whatever. I don't need to know why you want an account. It's not like I can tell you no. So I just said, oh, that's good. It's not like I live in a good area. I'd be more surprised to hear that someone did go to jail in this area. So it's pretty casual conversation most of the time. What's not casual is proceeding to act like I would be interested to know. You were in jail for stalking and assaulting a 13-year-old girl and threatening her and her family when they reported you. But he was sharing the information like he was just having a casual conversation with a friend. I'm a total stranger. So I asked him if he's allowed to have a social media account after his charges, to which he laughed and said, no, but it's okay. I won't use my real name. I tried to let the conversation die, but after a while he turned to his friend and said, I bet she's still on Facebook. And his friend said, dude, don't even bother. She's not worth it. She is, bro. She's bad. I know she wants me. It's just her parents that are keeping her away from me. I gave him his and told him to leave. Not in a customer-friendly tone either. I told him to pay his bill online because I would not be servicing his account after this. He left in a huff, and I immediately contacted my supervisors about whether we should report him or not to the local authorities, and yes, we did. We provided his information and handed over the audio/video of him admitting to wanting to stalk this girl again. But that's the most wild someone has admitted to me casually, as if he wasn't sharing the most disgusting thing about himself that he possibly could be. The way he spoke so casually about it and acted like it wasn't serious made me sick to my stomach. And I was honestly taken back by it. I never imagined someone could talk about doing that type of thing as if it wasn't serious. Story 32. A coworker once mentioned, totally straight-faced over lunch, that he keeps a jar of his own toenail clippings in his desk drawer. Not even kidding. He said it like it was no big deal, just munching on his sandwich. Oh yeah, I've been collecting them since I started here. I'm sitting there, fork halfway to my mouth, trying to process why anyone would do that, and he's acting like it's as normal as keeping spare pens. No explanation, no shame, just a shrug. I still catch myself staring at his desk sometimes, wondering if that jar still growing. Story 33. I did training in a very professional corporate finance environment. A new starter told me she was married and having an affair with a man who did mountain bike riding. The bike rider was meeting her for lunch, and her husband was picking her up after work. And would it be okay if everyone in the office got told to not mention the husband if the bike rider was there and vice versa? This was on the first morning. Within the first hour or so, it wasn't my business. Like, live your life however you want, but this woman was in her 50s and acting like a 15-year-old kid. On her first day in an office, with a 25-page etiquette manual, story 34. I work in construction, landscaping, home maintenance, renovations, etc., and I work on the cheap, so I get a lot of weird customers. One day, I'm helping some young guy, he's like 19 or 20, move into his first apartment and lugging his couch up the stairs into his place, and Hez says, after some small talk and exchanging names, "You're a pretty average-looking guy, so what kind of girls are you into?" Me? I'm so ugly, the only girl I can get is my own sister. I'm not joking, man. My sister's ugly too, so we screw all the time. We're both too ugly to get anyone else, so that's just how it is. We've been doing it since we were like 15 or 16. Pretty sure our parents haven't figured it out yet. Then proceeded to tell me what they did in bed together, in great detail. I took the money he owed me for the job and got out of there, lol. Thing was, he wasn't ugly, he was just kind of average looking, but a little chubby. Don't care if he was telling the truth. Don't need more details about him and his sister's romantic dealings. Story 35. Worked with a lady who was pregnant with her second or third child. She casually explained how she looked for men at bars who were financially stable, like lawyers, she said, and lied about being on birth control so she could get pregnant and be sure of steady child support. She said she really liked being a mom. The last time I saw her, it looked like she was up to fourth child, but we didn't get a chance to speak. She was a nice lady, but not someone I knew better than a hey, how was your weekend kind of level. And here she was explaining this to her work team over a cubicle wall, just like she was telling us about the place she went to lunch. It seemed pretty wild. Story 36. A friend and I were at a Barnes & Noble's looking around for books and a place to sit after. We sat at the Starbucks in the store and were reading through our chosen books. In comes this old man with his really big and fluffy dog that was so cute. The dog seemed friendly and he asked us if we wanted to pet her. As we are playing with the dog, he strikes a conversation with us. He's American, and the both of us girls are international students from India and Ethiopia, and he asks us where we're from. I tell him I'm from India, and he tells me that he spent some time in India. And I was like, oh, cool, where he said that he was in the conflict-torn region of Kashmir, where he was involved in some form as the military there. He said that he killed a lot of people there and even made the gesture of pulling a rifle, a big gun-like gesture, IDK guns, bruh. Internally, I was just like, what the actual, but he continued on about other stories of his life. I have never met this in my life before, and this was my first interaction. Absolutely wild to still think about. Story 37. A girl I was seeing casually told me that she was actively catfishing her ex-boyfriend. She had made a fake Instagram page using another girl's photos, followed her ex, and struck up a conversation. She arranged for them to meet at a bar, and instead of the fake girl showing up, she showed up herself to walk past him and say hello, as if it was some chance encounter that they were both in the same place. She did all this because she found out he was on Hinge 1 week after they broke up, and she thought I'd find this funny. She laughed it off when I told her she was committing a crime. I didn't stick around too long. Story 38. I was living in a shared house at college, originally students only, but the owners decided to open it up to anyone, and we ended up with a guy moving in, and he was dodgy, shall we say, like he hid meat cleavers around the house, and his mates were even worse. Anyway, I came downstairs one morning to find a friend of his sleeping on the floor wearing one of those paper-like jumpsuits the police give you when they take your clothes off you. He looked at me and realizing I saw the odd clothes, he smiled and laughed and just said, "Ha, I was arrested for rape," and just lay back down and went back to sleep, giggling. The way he said it so casually as if he was explaining something totally normal and tiny. But worst was how he found it funny, like he was telling me an amusing anecdote. It's been 20 years and his smile and giggle and dismissive casual manners still haunts me. I moved out very quickly. Story 39. Basically how she was totally stalking a guy, an old ex who clearly didn't want anything to do with her and lived in another country. That she went to that country, to his city, and sat and waited on terraces and places where she knew he hung out. She was convinced that if he just saw her, he would be completely in love again. He was married in the meantime. When she found him after wandering around for days, he was with his wife. She got cold feet and didn't dare approach him, but she spied on them for days. It was a bat-crazy story that she told, laughing as if it was the most normal thing in the world. Story 40. So I was talking to my boyfriend's buddy about how annoying it is when people are all talk, like all bark, no bite. And I gave some super tame example just to make my point. And then he goes, "Oh yeah, I know what you mean. My ex used to talk all this about this guy who assaulted her, saying how much she hated him, wish bad stuff would happen to him, whatever." So one day I saw the guy walking down the road and I threw him in my trunk and brought him to her. She flipped. I thought I was doing what she wanted, but nope, never saw her again. Had to go drop the guy back off where I found him. Story 41. Sometimes I casually say WTF things about my childhood. It's happened so often, I don't speak about it in person anymore, unless someone asks me a specific question. Too many funny stories, got horrified looks, which then spiraled into me trying to explain why it wasn't that bad compared to insert even more horrible thing, which makes them sadder, which makes me give up. Story 42. In university, I had a friend whose girlfriend was from mainland China. We went for coffee with our respective girlfriends. Somehow we started talking about tickets we've received, driving. They were all relatively benign things. Then my friend's girlfriend jumped in to tell her story. There was a fairly substantial setup, but boiled down to the fact that it's common for bicycles to be on major highways in China. Then, at the end of the long setup, she adds this. One day she was learning to drive and hit one of these bicyclists on a highway. Luckily, her uncle was a police officer because in China, it's common that if you hurt someone badly, you are required to pay for their hospital treatment. This is why her uncle came. He helped them take the person to a tire fire so they could burn them and not have to pay. She seemed earnest enough while telling the story, but when she realized how upset we were, she just said, no, it was just a joke. My friend broke up with her not long after, and to this day, I'm not sure whether that was a true story or, like she said, just a bad joke. Story 43. My mother would tell people that my younger sister and I were in their bedroom watching TV, and a PSA came on about child abuse, and I turned to my sister and said, run and get a pen and paper so I could write the number down. Our parents were actually abusive, but she repeated that like it was funny. In middle school, I overheard tell someone on the phone that you can beat your kids as much as you want, just don't leave any bruises. She also thought it was funny to tell us that she took a butcher's knife and stabbed it through a note she had written to her oldest sister with "Tonight for you" into my aunt's doll and left it on her bed. And she was a therapist turned psychologist, so she always twisted everything around to be my fault, as if it was the most natural thing to blame a 5-year-old for being molested. A 9-year-old is the cause of dad's affair, responsible for my sister's divorce because my then spouse and I got along so well and she married too quickly. Everything was my fault, even after I didn't live there. My father was a Chicago cop, and both my parents have offered weapons and told me to KS many times throughout my life. Story 44. Many years ago, I was a waitress. One night, I had a table that initially seemed pretty normal, a man and a woman on a first date, until I heard their conversation while cleaning the table beside theirs. Apparently, the woman's husband had committed by shooting himself, and she had the bullet made into a ring that she wears everywhere. That has always struck me as a very strange thing to do, and an even stranger thing to tell someone on a first date. Then again, I'm sure the experience was very traumatic for her, so I won't judge her reaction too negatively. Story 45. My old manager proudly told a story about her daughter. Her daughter had been misbehaving, so they decided to pull a trick on her. They were going for a day out somewhere, and on the way to wherever they were going, they'd be driving past the airport. Her and her husband told the daughter that they were taking her to the airport and she was being sent to China on her own because she'd been naughty. They kept this up the whole way there, and when the daughter saw them approach the airport, she was screaming, crying, obviously terrified. She told this story like it was funny, and I remember all the staff just being completely shocked. Story 46. Nice coworker was chatting with me while waiting for something at work. I knew she was going to be away from work, and I thought she was going on vacation, so I asked about it. She saw it wasn't a vacation, it was medical leave. I said sorry and would have dropped the subject, but she kept talking. She said her late husband had worked at the same place. He died before I started. She said everyone loved him, but he was terrible to her. She said she had gotten breast implants to try to make him like her more, but it hadn't worked. She said now that she was in a new healthy relationship, she was getting the implants removed because they were painful. She had to leave and was like, bye, don't tell anyone. Story 47. Was on a student trip to Ely, Montana, and we decided to spend our last night bar hopping. After we'd had a few, turns out half a dozen Canadian chicks are big news in Ely. We didn't have to pay for a single drink. I went to the ladies' room. As I was washing my hands, a drunken woman, maybe 10 years my senior, came in and paused by me. I love your hair, she said. Thanks, said I. Apparently that was all the precursor she needed to decide I was her best friend. She went into a stall, left the door open while peeing so she could regale me with her life story, including how much work sucked, and her boyfriend was probably cheating, and oh yeah, CPS took her kids away that morning again, but she'd get them back once she sobered up. She then left the bathroom, hit the karaoke stage, and sang the most haunting rendition of Fast Car that I have ever heard, and I try not to think too hard about all of that together because it makes me want to cry. Story 48. My husband and I were out for brunch and overheard a woman at a table next to us explain to her friend that she doesn't eat tuna because it kills dolphins, and that overfishing dolphins and other big fish and fish in general is what has led to global warming because there are no fish swimming to stir the water and to make the waves in the ocean anymore. And that makes the ocean water being hotter is making the planet hotter. Her friend took it in and added to the discussion, agreeing about how that made so much sense. These women were in their 30s and looked and acted outside of this one topic completely normal. Story 49. I was on a trip for work and several of us were having supper together. One of the group was a recently divorced woman who had a bit of a high-maintenance personality. During the meal, she mentioned that she and her recent ex have 2 children and she had pressured him to get a vasectomy. She proudly said that the day they got the test results back from the clinic that his clip job was successful, she served him with divorce papers. She was bragging that this way she never had to worry about him splitting his child support payments with anyone else. She then went on to talk about that day's meetings like she had just talked about weather and sports, like a sane person. Story 50. It's me. I'm the person that does this accidentally. I forget that not everyone can check off almost everything on a PTSD inventory, and I've been the compartmentalize and keep going sort since I was a child. I've even managed to surprise my therapist when talking about something I casually mention in passing a really big thing, like it's no big deal whatsoever. True, I swear, it's usually about a childhood neglect or abuse I experienced, but a couple years ago, I didn't realize I hadn't mentioned the murder that had happened right in front of me the day before until I casually dropped mention of after the shooting yesterday into whatever relatively mundane thing I was talking about and was interrupted with a, wait, what? Story 51. Immigrant family lore goes crazy. My grandfather and his brother cut each other off back in the 80s. I didn't even know he had a brother until I was an adult myself. But anyway, a few years ago, there was this news story of a guy who hid under a car and attacked a woman at my local shopping center. My mom sees this and goes, exactly like what my uncle's wife did to you, Mom, to which my grandmother goes, except we didn't call the police. Who knows what he would have done next? I'm sorry, what? I barely knew the man existed, and I found out he ordered his wife to attack my grandmother like some kind of assassin. The way they recounted it as if it was like running into a family member on the street, and not that a grown woman hid under a car, jumped out to grab my grandmother from behind, and wouldn't let go until my grandfather showed up to physically pull her off. He was officially cut off from the family several years after this happened. God knows the stories they haven't told me. Story 52. When I was in high school, this other kid I did theater with collected people's hairs. He had a whole binder with little baggies, each one with a name written on it in Sharpie and a single hair. He showed me and casually talked about how he enjoyed sneaking hairs off people's heads. He had a couple baggies pre-made for his next targets. The same kid also told me about how he typed up fake release forms from the theater for his parents and had them sign it. He put all kinds of weird stuff in it, like they were only allowed to see one of his performances for each show and stuff like that. He showed me a copy and told me he made a bunch of copies and hid them around his house. He explained all this to me like he was explaining a normal hobby.